Joe Biden's go woke, go broke budget is all about redistribution and government welfare dependency. I don't know. Whatever happened to job creation, growth, prosperity? What's wrong with that? With me now are my good pals, Art Laffer, former Reagan economic advisor, Steve Moore of Committee to Unleash Prosperity Hotline and FreedomWorks, and Vice President, and Steve Forbes, Forbes Media Chairman and Editor-in-Chief. Art Laffer, I'd go to you. You're kind of the senior guy. You're our mentor here. This is another Labor Day. The trouble is, I would argue Biden is not doing a darn thing to help working men and women in this country and those who really want to go back to work. That's my take. What's your read?
Well, I think you're correct on that, Larry. I mean, I think you're totally correct. By paying people not to work, obviously they're not going to go back to work. After being unemployed for a while and not working, they're going to lose their skills, Larry. And when they do finally go back to work, they're not going to be nearly as productive as they were. He is de-educating the population by putting them on these transfer payments and also just destroying the economic prospects for the U.S. economy for years to come. And it's very, very sad because the people who are going to suffer the most are those, the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, the less educated, the working class people. They're going to be suffering the most, and it's very sad. I hope this bill doesn't make it in any form, but I'm afraid it might.
Yeah, Steve Moore, I get your take on it. I mean, you've got big spending and taxing and regulating. You've also got this other element. You know, we're talking Labor Day here, and they want to unionize everything, but Labor Day does not necessarily mean Union Day. And unions don't mean what they used to mean when there was such a thing as, you know, powerful private sector unions, Steve Moore. And you have said, and I think we have a chart, we're going to show you a picture, the right-to-work states have done better than the blue states who forced unionization. Hopefully we have a chart on that. Steve Moore, what you think?
There's no doubt about that. I mean, the evidence is crystal clear about that, that the states that, and by the way, Laffer and I have done a lot of the research on this for ALEC over the years that shows that, you know, whatever period you look at, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, that you get a lot more job creation, a lot more economic vitality in these states that are right to work. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, we used to meet with CEOs all the time, Larry, who said, you know, we don't even consider moving a factory or a facility or a headquarters to a state that's not right to work because we want that flexibility. Workers want it too. You know, a perfect example would be the auto industry. Mm-hmm. You know, we haven't lost auto jobs in this country. It's just the auto jobs have moved out of the forced union states, and they've moved to states like Alabama and Florida and Texas, where workers have more flexibility. And one last other quick thing, you know, that a lot of workers say, I don't want to be in a union. I want to be able to negotiate my own salary. I don't want somebody else negotiating it for me.
Yeah, Steve Forbes, it's a big difference between government unions and private unions. Even today, you still have, Steve, the hard hats, the construction workers, the pipeline workers, the energy workers. They're unionized, but they're still private unions. They have a different take on life than these government unions, do they not?
They do indeed, and many of them just look at what the government unions get in terms of benefits and these bloated pensions and just shake their head. Back in the 1980s and early 90s, when I headed up the oversight organization for Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, it was a bipartisan board, and the lead Democrat was Lane Kirkland, who was then the head of the AFL-CIO. He spoke movingly about the House of Labor, fought hard for higher salaries and benefits. But when it came to communism, when it came to strong defense, when it came to defending America, he was a stalwart. He saw a difference between these left-wing governments and genuine free labor movements and genuine freedom. He understood it. They don't understand that today, many of these government unions.
The government unions, Steve, just to stay with this, because it's all about Labor Day, they don't share the values of the traditional labor workforce, men and women. And they're still there. That workforce is still there, Steve. They voted for Trump. They voted for Reagan many years ago when you and I and Arthur were there. But there's a big gap. I asked this of Brian Kilmeade, between the government unions and, you know, in general, Washington, and how these middle class, middle income, blue collar types and non-blue collar types, this sort of traditional American workforce thinks. There's a huge gap between them and Washington.
Well,
there is indeed.
Go ahead, anybody. I don't care. Arthur, you want to say something? Go ahead.
I'll let the Steve and Steves fight it out.
We have to defer to Art. Art is the oldest. Art was there with me in 1882 when we had the first Labor Day. So please, Art Laffer, go right ahead.
You were my first junior hire, Larry. I remember you well. This young kid coming on the scene in 1882. It was really delightful. Let me just say a little math theorem, if I can, and it's just really important. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. By taking away from people who make a little bit more, you reduce their incentives and they produce a little less. By giving to people who have a little bit less, you provide an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will produce a little less. Whenever you redistribute income, you will reduce total income, and what Biden is doing here, and what is being backed by the, as you say, government employees unions. It's not the real working unions. This is the government employees, where they're not facing a private sector company. You will inure to the detriment of this economy for decades to come, Larry. This is worse than W and Obama and their stimulus packages in 2008, 2009. This is really deadly and has a huge impact on the economy for a long, long time. And it's math. So it's not left-wing or right-wing. It's not liberal or conservative.
But let me just add one quick thing to
the trade unions.
Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, Steve Forbes.
The trade unions understood you had to make something in order to get something. Steel producers, auto producers.
Right.
And that link is lost with a lot of these government unions, where they just see the money coming in and don't realize what it takes to produce that money.
Steve Moore, you were going to...
Exactly.
Unions. What I'm against, and I think it's important for your viewers to understand this, what Biden is proposing is something quite radical that really disrupts labor law for the last century. It basically says that states cannot adopt right-to-work laws. You would literally overnight, if that plan were adopted, and they're going to try to put this in that $3.5 trillion bill, you'd have literally millions of workers, Larry, against their will, being forced to join a union against their will and paying the dues to the unions. If people want to collectively bargain and they want to do it voluntarily and they voluntarily join a union, I have no problem with that. I have a big problem with the government telling them they have to join the union.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference. Again, I'll repeat this from the riff, Arthur. There's a big difference between Labor Day and labor unions. And you've got 154 million Americans working. And, you know, today only 9% are unionized. Only 9% are unionized. Now, of that 9%, a third of that is government unions. But that shows you unions are out of favor and entrepreneurship is in favor. But, Art, the Bidens don't like entrepreneurship, as I understand it, and they don't understand if you tax businesses and investors, you get, what, lower profits. So what do lower profits do? Why are profits hated in the Biden-Washington, Art Laffer? And what are the consequences of lower profits?
It makes no sense because, well, Larry, it makes no sense because a taxi cab driver without a taxi cab doesn't earn very much money. And labor needs capital, and capital needs labor. It's a partnership between labor and capital, not a competition, not a forced thing. In 1957, there were only 2 states that were right-to-work states, as Steve Moore knows very well. That was Arkansas and Florida. Today, over half the states in the United States are right-to-work states because they understand the importance of the partnership between labor and capital. And that really fits perfectly with the low tax environment we've had ever since Ronald Reagan cut that first round of taxes in 1981. The highest tax rate has not exceeded 40% since that time. And that's because labor and capital are friends, not enemies.
You know, Steve Forbes, want to go to one other point. And by the way, Trump's corporate tax cut had more positive benefits thrown out than anyone. I mean, low unemployment, lower poverty, less inequality. It's really quite remarkable. Why you want to reverse that, I'll never know. Revenues, that's right. Revenues went up. New studies show that revenue. By the way, Arthur, there's a new, listen to this. Alan Reynolds just sent me this. The OECD did a study. The Laffer curve works for the corporate tax, the income tax, and the value-added tax for all the OECD countries. I don't want you to get a swelled head, but the Laffer curve works, and all these OECD professors said that. But Steve Forbes, I got to go to you. I want to close on this. I want our workforce to get wealthier, more income. So higher wages. I always hear this from Wall Street economists. Higher wages cause inflation. Steve Forbes, tell us why that is just not true.
Well, you get higher wages through investment, innovation, creativity. And those wages are real because it's from productivity, from people producing things. That's how wages go up. When people have more to spend and those wages are going up for the right reasons, that means more prosperity for everyone. And that's why Henry Ford made a great breakthrough over 110 years ago when he doubled the wages of his workers to keep them on the job, reduced the work hour day from 12 to 8 hours, $5 a day. Did it right. Productivity went up because of the moving assembly line. So it goes together. Productivity, higher wages, higher standard of living. And so this idea that wage increases on their own are bad, no, they're not. Not if it's done in a productive environment and free markets.
Steve Moore, your lot this evening is to kill the Phillips curve once and for all. I'll give you 25 seconds to do it. Kill the Phillips curve.
You and I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal, remember, about 3 or 4 years ago, saying wages don't cause inflation. We want Americans to be more productive. We all want Americans to get rich, and you get rich through the best path to prosperity, which someone once told me is free market capitalism.
Yes, sir. Newt Gingrich says big government socialism is losing badly in the opinion polls to free enterprise or free market capitalism. That's Newt's latest thing. Art Laffer, I love you. Thank you so much. Steve Moore, Steve Forbes, happy Labor Day to all of you. Let's boost labor, not drive it down.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.